June 6, 1944, permanently altered the course of world history. In this extraordinary, hours-length feature documentary, we examine the Normandy landings from two completely opposing perspectives. First, we experience the assault through the eyes of Allied soldiers in the waves of the English Channel. Then, we step into the boots of the German defenders in the cold concrete bunkers of the Atlantic Wall. This is not just a story of tanks and strategies, but of human survival, fear, and ultimate courage. As dawn broke on the French coast, thousands of young men on both sides of the front faced each other in history's bloodiest theater. Sit back and immerse yourself in this second-by-second, epic war documentary. We begin our journey in the Allied camps in England. In the spring of 1944, the entire island of Great Britain had transformed into one massive military base. The southern coastal towns and forests were packed with hundreds of thousands of American, British, and Canadian soldiers. Tent cities, ammunition dumps, and thousands of landing vehicles filled the landscape. No regular soldier yet knew the exact invasion spot. In late May, the camps were completely sealed to guarantee secrecy. Soldiers were isolated from the outside world. Letters were censored, phone lines cut, and no one was allowed outside the guarded barbed wire fences. The agony of waiting was grueling. Soldiers spent their time cleaning weapons, playing cards, and wondering if they would ever see home again. Officers called the men into secret briefing tents where the upcoming mission was finally revealed. Soldiers were shown precise aerial photographs, maps, and sandable models of the French coast. The beach sectors were designated by codenames: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Every squad was given pinpoint targets of bunkers that had to be destroyed. On the evening of June 5th, soldiers were distributed their final gear and a message from the High Command. Every man received a letter signed by General Eisenhower, starting with, "You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade." The men blackened their faces with camouflage paint and packed dozens of kilograms of ammo, grenades, and medical supplies. In the darkness of the night, the harbor docks echoed with the rumble of marching boots. Soldiers boarded giant transport ships and small, flat-bottomed Higgins landing craft. Due to the recent severe storm, the sea was still extremely rough, and the ships tossed violently even in the harbor. The gates closed, lines were cast off, and the fleet headed out. It was just after midnight on June 6 when the engines of hundreds of C-47 transport planes roared over Normandy. Inside the aircraft, absolute darkness and silence prevailed, broken only by the mechanical rumble. Soldiers sat in heavy gear, hearts pounding. By the door, a red light glowed, signaling that they were approaching the drop zone behind enemy lines. Suddenly, the sky tore open in flames. German anti-aircraft guns spotted the air fleets and opened a fierce barrage into the darkness. Shrapnel ripped through fuselages, and the turbulence tossed the heavily laden planes from side to side. Many pilots panicked, accelerated, and veered off course. Above the door, a green light flashed. It was time to jump. Soldiers stepped through the aircraft doors, straight into the black void of the night. Parachutes snapped open, and the men descended rapidly through crossing tracer fire. The airborne drop turned into absolute chaos. Strong winds and scattered flight formations scattered thousands of men miles away from their target zones, right into swamps and enemy backyards. Upon hitting the ground, many paratroopers found themselves completely alone in the pitch-black French countryside. Equipment bundles were lost, and heavy weapons sank into marshlands intentionally flooded by the Germans. Men moved cautiously behind hedgerows, fingers on triggers, using a small metallic cricket clicker to identify comrades moving in the dark. Since original companies were scattered across Normandy, officers and privates formed makeshift combat groups from different units. These small, lost guerrilla squads launched lightning raids against German communication lines, roadblocks, and headquarters. This fragmented activity deeply confused German officers, who could not map the main assault. Simultaneously, men of the British 6th Airborne Division executed the most precise glider assault in history. 3 wooden Horsa gliders crash-landed with pinpoint accuracy right next to the vital Orne River Bridge, known as Pegasus Bridge. British soldiers rushed out and captured the bridge from the Germans in just minutes, blocking armor reinforcements. By 4 o'clock in the morning, the Allied airborne troops had managed to establish a fragmented but stubborn front behind enemy lines. They had seized key crossroads and paralyzed German communications. At the same time, from the south, they heard a distant, roaring sound from the sea. The largest armada in history had arrived, and the main beach assault was about to begin. At 5:30 a.m., the fog covering the Normandy coast cleared briefly. Soldiers shivering in Higgins landing craft looked behind them and saw an incredible sight. The sea horizon was filled with ships. Over 6,000 warships and transports filled the English Channel. Moments later, the giant guns of cruisers and battleships opened fire and the roar shook the air for miles. Under the cover of naval gunfire, the small landing craft turned their bows toward the beaches. Inside the Higgins boats, the atmosphere was suffocating. Engines screamed, waves pounded the sides, and cold seawater splashed over the soldiers. Many suffered from severe seasickness and vomited on the floor. Everyone gripped their weapons, knowing the ramp would open into a death zone. On Omaha Beach, the first boats reached the shallows at 6:30 a.m. As the steel ramps of the landing craft clattered down, German MG-42 machine guns opened a murderous crossfire. The men in the front ranks fell within seconds, directly into the water. Bullets pierced the thin walls of the boats, and the water turned red with blood instantly. Soldiers had to jump into deep water to survive. Those soldiers who made it out of the water found themselves trapped on the wide-open sandy beach. German artillery and mortar pounded the shore continuously. The Allied tanks, meant to support the infantry, had mostly sunk in the waves before reaching the beach. Men lay flat in the sand behind a small shingle seawall, unable to advance a single step under the bunker fire. Simultaneously, west of Omaha, the elite U.S. Ranger Battalion performed a seemingly impossible mission. They had to capture the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, atop which sat a heavy Nazi artillery battery. The Rangers landed under artillery fire, threw ropes and ladders up the sheer 30-meter rock face, and began scaling the cliff despite a hail of bullets. German soldiers cut the ropes of the scaling Rangers and dropped hand grenades down from the ledge. However, the Rangers kept climbing, pulling themselves up with bare hands, reaching the top. They fought a brutal, close-quarters battle in the bunker complex, only to find the giant guns had been hidden in the woods. The Rangers tracked them down and destroyed them. By 10 a.m., the situation on Omaha was catastrophic, and General Bradley considered evacuation. That was when small groups of surviving officers and privates took fate into their own hands. There are two kinds of people who are staying on this beach: those who are dead and those who are gonna die. Now let's get the hell out of here, came the famous cry. Allied destroyers and warships risked running aground, navigating dangerously close to the shallows to support the men on the shore. They fired point-blank into the German concrete bunkers. Thanks to this support, the Americans finally managed to breach the German defenses from the rear. By noon, the bloody beach of Omaha was secured, but the price was thousands of casualties. While Omaha was a struggle for life and death, the U.S. 4th Division landed on Utah Beach due to sea currents. The boats drifted 2 kilometers off course, but fortunately, the sector was lightly defended. General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. made a swift decision. We'll start the war from right here. Utah was secured rapidly, with minimal casualties. In the eastern sectors of Normandy, British and Canadian forces struck gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. They were supported by specialized tanks, designed by General Hobart, known as Hobart's Funnies, equipped with flails for mine clearing and fascines for bridging. These war machines helped breach beach obstacles much faster than planned. On Juno Beach, the Canadians initially faced fierce German resistance and heavy artillery fire. Despite taking casualties, they demonstrated exceptional offensive power. The Canadians crushed the German positions on the beach and advanced deeper into the French inland than any other Allied units on the first day, severing key routes. Throughout the entire invasion day, the Allied air forces completely ruled the skies of France. Thousands of Spitfires, Mustangs, and Thunderbolts bombed German lines, bridges, and railways, paralyzing Nazi reinforcement movements. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was so severely depleted that it deployed only 2 fighters to the beaches all day. As the sun began to set behind the English Channel on the evening of June 6th, the Allies had achieved their objective. All 5 beaches had been linked into a fragmented but unbreakable beachhead on French soil. Over 150,000 soldiers had successfully landed. The liberation of Europe had begun, and the end of Nazi occupation loomed ahead. Although the operation was a massive strategic success, the Allied victory demanded a terrible price. During the first 24 hours, over 10,000 Allied soldiers were either killed, wounded, or missing in action. The beach sand was littered with abandoned gear and the bodies of young men. This was the price paid to shatter Nazism. We have seen the invasion through the eyes of the attackers. But how did this largest operation in history look from the defenders' side? How did German soldiers and officers experience the darkness of the night and the steel storm of dawn? Next, we turn the pages of history and move into the positions of the German army before Achuar. On the German side, defense was commanded by the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Knowing an Allied invasion was coming, he sought to turn the French coast into an impenetrable fortress. Under Rommel's direction, millions of mines, steel obstacles, and wooden stakes, known as Rommel's asparagus, were installed on the beaches to destroy landing craft and gliders immediately. Above the beaches rose giant bunkers and artillery emplacements, constructed from meters-thick, reinforced concrete. German soldiers were equipped with the war's most effective infantry weapons, such as MG-42 machine guns, whose incredible rate of fire up to 1,500 rounds per minute could create a wall of death on any open beach. In their bunkers, defenders felt safe and invincible. Behind the bunkers, however, reality was different. The static infantry divisions guarding the coastline, such as the 716th and 352nd, were not Germany's elite. Many soldiers were either very young boys, wounded veterans, or Soviet volunteers captured on the Eastern Front. They lacked heavy machinery, mobility, and cohesive combat experience. On June 4th and 5th, a violent storm lashed the French coast. German meteorologists assured the command that the Allies would be unable to launch an invasion in such weather for at least 2 weeks. Consequently, the German army lowered its readiness level. Many officers were granted leave, and in the coastal trenches, soldiers retreated to their barracks for shelter. Due to the weather forecast, Germany's key commanders were absent, right at H hour. Field Marshal Rommel himself had traveled back to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday. Meanwhile, the army commander of the Normandy sector, General Dahlmann, had traveled to Rennes to participate in a staff map exercise. The German defense was left without its decision-makers. As the night of June 6 darkened over Normandy, the coastal bunkers were quiet. Sentry soldiers looked out onto the dark, stormy sea, seeing nothing unusual. They believed the night was just another routine shift among many. None of them suspected that, just a few kilometers away, in the dark sky, the engines of hundreds of Allied planes were already humming. It was just after midnight when the headquarters of the German 7th Army awoke to the first scattered reports. Coastal observation posts and inland checkpoints reported aircraft sounds and silhouettes in the sky. At first, officers believed it was just a routine Allied bombing raid, but soon, telephone lines began buzzing all across Normandy. Suddenly, German soldiers in the rear lines came face to face with an unbelievable sight. From the dark night sky, hundreds of white silk shapes descended directly into their headquarters gardens, fields, and roadblocks. These were not bombs, but heavily armed American and British paratroopers. Cries of German sentries echoed through the night. Alarm! Fallschirmjäger! Chaos spread rapidly behind the German defensive lines. Allied commando squads immediately began cutting German telephone cables and blowing up bridges. Many small German outposts found themselves completely isolated from the outside world in an instant. Without working communications, local German commanders were blind, unable to gauge the scale of the assault. The German high command in Berlin was paralyzed. In order to deploy Germany's powerful panzer divisions, the panzer reserves against the paratroopers in Normandy, Adolf Hitler's personal authorization was required. However, Hitler had taken a sleeping pill and was fast asleep in Berchtesgaden. The generals were too terrified to wake the dictator over uncertain reports. German confusion was worsened by a clever Allied ruse. Hundreds of rubber and cloth dummy paratroopers, known as Ruperts, were dropped from planes. They looked like real paratroopers in the air and exploded upon hitting the ground. German officers reported enemy attacks everywhere, causing headquarters to send their scarce reserves in the wrong directions. By 4 a.m., the German coastal artillery batteries, such as the massive battery at Lons-sur-Mer, finally received combat alarms. Soldiers rushed from cold barracks to their heavy cannons. A threatening rumble echoed from the dark sea, and German officers adjusted their gun sights toward the black open ocean. They knew the true trial was just beginning. At 5 a.m., German sentries rubbed their eyes in the bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach. As the morning mist cleared, they saw something none of them thought possible. The entire sea was black with ships stretching all the way to the horizon. A panicked German officer called headquarters. "There are thousands of ships here. This cannot be real." Moments later, hell broke loose. Allied battleships and cruisers opened fire on the coastal fortifications. Giant shells exploded around the German bunkers, shaking the meters-thick concrete walls. The air filled with flying sand, rocks, and concrete dust. German soldiers lay blinded and deafened at the bottom of their shelters, praying for survival. At the most critical defensive position, on Omaha Beach, Widerstandsnest, WN-62, a young 20-year-old German soldier named Heinrich Severloh prepared for the hardest moment of his life. He checked his MG-42 machine gun and readied the ammunition belts. As the naval fire ceased, he looked down at the beach and saw hundreds of Allied landing craft approaching. Severloh's superior gave the order, "Fire." The young soldier squeezed the trigger, and the MG-42 began to sing a tearing, unbroken volley directly into the American soldiers emerging from the boats. Severloh fired for hours with mathematical precision, changing overheated barrels one after another. He would later become known as the Beast of Omaha. By noon, the German situation in the bunkers turned critical. Ammunition was running low, and many heavy guns had been silenced by point-blank fire from Allied destroyers. American soldiers had made it off the beach and were now attacking the German lines from the rear. The battle turned into a brutal trench warfare where defenders fought for survival. Ultimately, the defense of WN-62 collapsed as the Americans surrounded the stronghold. A wounded Severloh and his few surviving comrades were forced to abandon their positions and retreat inland under a hail of bullets. The most feared wall of the Atlantic Wall had shattered, and the Germans realized they could no longer push the Allies back. It was not until 2 p.m. that Adolf Hitler finally awoke in Berchtesgaden and received a full briefing on Normandy. The dictator remained convinced that the landing was a mere distraction, and the main assault would strike Pas-de-Calais. By the time Hitler finally authorized the release of the heavy panzer divisions, the Allied beachhead was already too strong. The only German armored unit capable of striking quickly was the 21st Panzer Division. Its tanks surged toward the British and Canadian beaches in the afternoon. The counterattack was fierce, and the Germans briefly managed to wedge their way to the coast. However, total Allied air superiority and heavy anti-tank weapons halted the Nazi armor in a sea of fire. As the afternoon progressed, the German coastal guns fell silent, one by one. Ammunition ran low, and continuous Allied airstrikes blocked all supply and reinforcements from reaching the front. German artillerymen were forced to abandon their giant concrete bunkers and retreat with the infantry as Allied troops swarmed the trenches. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel arrived by car back at his headquarters in France late in the evening of June 6th. A total catastrophe awaited him. His life's work, the supposedly impenetrable Atlantic Wall, had shattered in just a few hours. Rommel immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Without air superiority and free reserves, the war in the West was lost. As the darkness of night fell over ruined Normandy, thousands of German soldiers found themselves surrounded and leaderless. Many young boys and older reservists raised their hands in surrender to the Allies. The beach bunkers, which in the morning had been the pride of the Nazi regime, were now filled with smoke, blood, and captured men. On the German side, D-Day ended in a total defensive collapse. Over 4,000 German soldiers were killed or wounded, and more than 10,000 had been taken prisoner in just 24 hours. The strategic initiative had permanently shifted to the Allies, and the road to Berlin was open. The final act of the Third Reich had begun. This was the complete story of the Normandy landings, told from two different perspectives. We experienced the massive force of the Allied assault and the despair of the German defenders on the Atlantic Wall. This fateful day cost thousands of lives, but saved Europe from Nazism. Thank you for watching this feature documentary. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.